Morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting the walls gold. Veda sat on the edge of the couch, her hands wrapped around a mug of steaming tea, staring blankly at the floor. Her eyes carried a story of sleepless nights, silent tears, and quiet suffering. I watched her, feeling the weight of the tension in the room, a tension that had built over months, over years. The house felt smaller than it should, the air thick with unspoken words and unrelenting fear. A sharp knock at the door shattered the fragile calm. Veda flinched. I walked over and opened it. Standing there was a man in a crisp suit, an envelope in his hand. He smiled politely but firmly. "Good morning. I have a notice for Mr. Sterling Hartley. Legal matters." My heart skipped. The first step had come, the moment we had been preparing for. Sterling didn't come down immediately. I could hear his footsteps above, pacing, muttering. The sound of someone trying to maintain control but failing. Veda's grip on my arm tightened. "Do you think he'll," she began, but I interrupted softly. "We'll handle it." The envelope slipped into my hands. Court papers. Eviction notice. Final. Unquestionable. My gaze met Veda's. Her lips trembled, a mixture of fear and hope. Finally, hope. By mid-morning, the driveway filled with activity. Movers, locksmiths, security vans, and even news cameras that had caught wind of the dispute began to gather. Sterling's world, built on arrogance and control, was about to crumble in public view. He appeared at the top of the staircase, face pale, eyes wild. His suit, once pristine, was now creased, his hair unkempt. He shouted, "I own this house. I built it. I decide." "Not anymore," I said, stepping forward. The officers standing behind me were firm. "Eviction is final. You must vacate immediately." Sterling's laugh was sharp and hollow. "Justice? You call this justice?" His voice trembled with rage, but it carried no power. Security officers moved in as he lunged, and for a moment, the house was chaos. The cameras captured every scream, every desperate movement, every loss of control. By afternoon, Sterling's meltdown was streaming live on social media. Clips of his resistance, his furious attempts to intimidate, went viral. Hashtags exploded. Memes spread like wildfire. He had lost the power to manipulate perception, the world saw him for what he was, an angry, desperate man clinging to a fantasy of dominance. Inside the house, Veda walked through her rooms, touching the walls, reclaiming her space. "This is ours," she whispered, her voice steady now, free from the tremor of fear. I nodded. "Yes, and nothing can take it from us again." Locksmiths replaced the locks. Security officers reinforced every entry. Sterling's threats came via messages, but they felt hollow against the legal and physical reality. "You may have won the battle," he wrote, "but the war is not over." I read it and smiled faintly. "He has nowhere left to hide," I said. Veda leaned against me, relief washing over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. By the next morning, the house was quiet. The mansion, once a cage of fear, now stood as a symbol of resilience. Veda walked through the garden, breathing in freedom, letting the wind carry away the last traces of dread. Every step was a declaration, she was no longer a victim. But Sterling's shadow lingered, thin but palpable, hinting at the dangers yet to come. Secrets, betrayals, and revelations would rise, testing the strength they had fought so hard to reclaim. The night fell quietly, but inside the house, silence was deceptive. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corners of the room seemed louder than it was, as if Sterling's anger had seeped into the walls themselves. Veda sat by the window, the moonlight tracing the lines of her face, a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She had won, yes, but the victory felt fragile. Life after years of oppression was unfamiliar, and freedom carried its own weight. I joined her at the window, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did it," I whispered. "You took back what was always yours." She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze stayed fixed outside, where the garden swayed in the gentle breeze. Then she spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not just about him anymore, it's about me. Who I am when no one is watching, when no one is controlling me." I nodded. "Exactly. That's what matters now. You don't just survive, Veda. You live." The next few days brought a storm of media attention. Reporters knocked on the gates, neighbors whispered, and social media buzzed endlessly. Sterling had tried to smear her name, to twist the narrative, but the evidence was irrefutable. People saw the truth, and the truth had a weight Sterling could no longer bear. Veda took control of the narrative herself. She started documenting everything: the threats, the intimidation, the manipulation, carefully, meticulously. Each record was a shield, a testament to her resilience. I watched her grow stronger, step by step, transforming fear into determination. One evening, as we reviewed the latest documents, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think it's over? He's planning something else." Veda's fingers tightened around the device. Her jaw set, eyes sharp and unyielding. "Let him try. I'm ready." The following week, subtle signs appeared: strange cars parked near the house, odd noises in the night, someone trying the gates. Sterling was testing boundaries, pushing limits. But every attempt was met with precise, measured resistance. Security cameras, legal measures, and the unwavering courage of Veda formed an invisible fortress around us. Then came the letter, unsigned, left at the gate. The words were simple, but the threat unmistakable: "This is not the end. You cannot escape me." Veda read it aloud, her voice steady, her eyes cold. "This is the end for him," she said. "We are not hiding anymore." It became clear that Sterling was not just a threat to the property, but to their peace of mind, their very sense of safety. He thrived on fear, and fear was no longer available to him. Veda realized that reclaiming the house was only the first step. The next battle was about reclaiming her life entirely, without shadows haunting her every move. Together, we devised a plan, not of retaliation, but of absolute control over their environment. Every door, every window, every entrance was monitored. Every interaction documented. Sterling might have power in imagination, in fury, but reality was now firmly in Veda's hands. Weeks passed. Sterling's attempts grew desperate, absurd even. Social media campaigns to vilify Veda fizzled out under scrutiny. Legal threats collapsed under evidence. Each day, Veda's confidence grew, her aura of quiet authority spreading through every corner of the house. The mansion no longer felt like a cage, it felt like a stronghold, a sanctuary. But just as the nights grew peaceful, a new challenge emerged: a whisper from the past, someone connected to Sterling who had not been seen or heard of before. A figure moving in shadows, watching, waiting. The story was far from over. Freedom had been reclaimed, yes, but vigilance would be needed. The war had shifted from open confrontation to a quiet, relentless game of strategy and foresight. Veda looked out at the moonlit garden again, this time with a small smile. She knew now that victory was not a moment, it was a continuous process, a journey of resilience, courage, and unyielding determination. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to walk that path, no matter what came next. Morning broke with a golden calm that seemed almost defiant after weeks of tension. Veda moved through the house with a purpose that had not been there before. Every room she entered, every corridor she walked, seemed infused with her presence, her authority. It was no longer Sterling's world to haunt, it was hers to inhabit. The unexpected visitor from the past, an obscure figure connected to Sterling, made their presence known subtly at first. A shadow lingering near the driveway, a car that seemed to follow no route, the faintest whisper through the phone line. Veda noticed it immediately. She had learned to trust her instincts, sharpened by months of fear and defiance. "This isn't just about Sterling anymore," she said to me as we reviewed the latest surveillance footage. Her eyes, normally warm and reflective, now carried a cold, calculating edge. "This is about anyone who thinks they can threaten me through him. We need to anticipate, not just react." Her focus shifted to strategy. The house became a living map of security points, cameras repositioned, entrances reinforced, even minor pathways monitored. We implemented routines to detect any anomaly, any subtle intrusion. Veda's calm demeanor masked a mind that never rested, a mind calculating every possibility, every outcome. Outside, the world seemed oblivious. Neighbors went about their days, unaware of the silent war unfolding in the house. Social media chatter died down, the initial frenzy fading into curiosity. But Veda knew that Sterling or anyone connected to him could strike when least expected. The key was control, and control was a quiet, deliberate mastery over the environment. Days turned into weeks. Life resumed a semblance of normalcy. Veda resumed her routines, her hobbies, even small outings, always cautious, always alert. There was a strange duality now, freedom and vigilance intertwined. Every smile she gave, every casual conversation she had, carried an undercurrent of resilience. She was no longer the frightened woman who had fled her own home. She was a strategist, a guardian of her own destiny. Then, one evening, the silence was broken by a single, precise act. A package arrived at the gate unmarked, nondescript, and heavy. Veda opened it carefully, gloves on, every sense heightened. Inside was a single photograph, a snapshot of her from months ago, taken without her knowledge. It was a clear reminder that Sterling's reach, and his allies, were broader than anticipated. Her face remained unreadable, but her mind raced. "They're trying to intimidate me," she said quietly, more to herself than to me. "But intimidation only works if you let it. I won't." The following days required a new level of vigilance. We traced the origins of the photograph, used digital forensics to uncover its source. It was an intricate network of attempts to destabilize her, yet each lead only strengthened Veda's resolve. She realized that fear had been Sterling's weapon, and knowledge preparedness was her shield. As Veda grew more confident, she also began reaching out beyond the house. Allies emerged, old friends, legal advisors, cybersecurity experts. Each connection fortified her position. Her story became not just one of personal victory but of empowerment, a beacon for others who had suffered in silence. Yet even as plans and defenses solidified, the presence of the unknown observer lingered. Someone watched, always on the edges, always testing boundaries. Veda knew that this was no longer about a single man, it was about the network of fear, influence, and manipulation that had defined her life for so long. And she was ready to confront it, not with brute force, but with strategy, foresight, and the unwavering courage that had been forged in months of struggle. Night after night, Veda would stand by the window, looking out over the garden. The moonlight illuminated her figure, casting long shadows that merged with the darkness. But unlike before, the darkness no longer intimidated her. She had learned to move through it, to see clearly, to anticipate every hidden threat. Her journey had evolved. It was no longer merely about reclaiming a house or confronting a man. It was about reclaiming life itself on her terms, with her rules. Every challenge, every subtle threat, every whisper from the past was now a test of her resilience. And Veda had learned to meet every test with calm, calculated strength. The house, once a place of fear, now thrummed with quiet authority. Every room, every hallway, every shadow was under her watchful eye. Freedom had a price, and Veda was willing to pay it vigilantly, relentlessly, fearlessly. But deep down, she knew the ultimate test was yet to come. Sterling had been just the beginning. The world beyond the walls of her house was full of shadows, full of challenges that would require every ounce of courage, every fragment of strategy she had honed. And Veda was ready. The days that followed were a mix of routine and quiet tension. Veda moved through them with a new rhythm, one dictated not by fear, but by vigilance. Even simple errands, going to the market, meeting a friend for coffee, or walking through the neighborhood, were approached with an acute awareness of surroundings. Every unfamiliar face, every lingering glance, every vehicle out of place was catalogued in her mind. Her interactions became more intentional. Conversations were measured, words carefully chosen. She had learned to convey warmth without vulnerability, strength without aggression. People noticed the subtle shift in her demeanor, a calm confidence that was almost magnetic. Friends and neighbors who had once seen her as timid or reserved now regarded her with a mixture of admiration and quiet respect. Yet beneath the surface, a storm brewed. Sterling's network was persistent, patient, and resourceful. Veda received subtle signals: a misplaced item, an anonymous message, a hint that someone had been in the vicinity of her home. Each incident was minor on its own, but collectively they painted a picture. Sterling's reach had not ended, and the game of power and fear was far from over. Veda, however, did not falter. She leaned into preparation, transforming the house into both a sanctuary and a command center. Cameras, sensors, and digital tracking tools became her eyes and ears. Patterns were studied, movements predicted. She had become both observer and strategist, anticipating not just the immediate threat but the ripple effects that could follow. One afternoon, as she reviewed footage from the front gate, a new figure appeared, someone who did not belong. The movements were careful, calculated, almost rehearsed. Veda's pulse quickened, but not in panic. She recognized the signs of a professional, someone sent deliberately to test her defenses. "This isn't random," she said, voice steady, almost detached. "They're probing, looking for weaknesses." Plans shifted. Routes were changed, routines altered. The house, once predictable, became a maze of contingencies designed to confuse and deter any intruder. But Veda understood that physical security was only one layer. Intelligence, information, and timing were equally critical. To that end, she began expanding her network. Trusted allies, old friends, cybersecurity experts, even legal contacts became her extended team. Each person contributed a piece of the puzzle: knowledge, surveillance, protection, or strategy. Through them, she began to map out the broader network that had enabled Sterling's reach. Meanwhile, she also started thinking offensively. It was not enough to defend, she needed to understand, anticipate, and counter. Digital traces, financial transactions, subtle patterns in communication all became data points she could use. The predator had become the hunted, and Veda was learning how to strike with precision. The psychological impact on her adversaries was subtle but profound. Messages left unspoken, warnings that went ignored, attempts at intimidation that fell flat, each failure chipped away at their confidence. They realized, too late, that Veda had transformed. Fear was no longer the weapon, it had become her tool, controlled and directed with intent. Even in the quiet moments, her vigilance did not waver. At night, she would review plans, analyze movements, and rehearse contingencies. Her sleep was interrupted by strategies, by simulations of possible scenarios. She had become both the planner and the executor, a force honed by months of survival and careful observation. And then came a message that changed everything. Not a threat, not a taunt, but an acknowledgement, a subtle communication from the network, indicating that they recognized her growing strength. It was a test, a signal that the real game was about to begin. Veda understood immediately, this was not about Sterling anymore. This was about the system he had been part of, a web of influence and manipulation that extended far beyond a single individual. She was no longer reacting, she was preparing to engage on a scale she had only imagined in her most cautious calculations. The tension in the air was palpable. Every decision carried weight, every movement held consequence. Veda felt the gravity of the moment, but it did not intimidate her. She had faced fear, endured manipulation, and emerged stronger. She knew now that control was not about dominance over others, it was mastery over oneself. As the days turned into weeks, the shadows around her began to shift. Allies moved closer, threats receded, and the network's attempts to unsettle her grew more desperate. But each act only revealed their patterns, their weaknesses, their reliance on predictable tactics. And Veda was ready, poised to turn their own strategies against them, piece by piece. The house, once a symbol of fear, had become a fortress of strategy and intelligence. Every room, every corridor, every window was now a point of observation. The world outside could plot, manipulate, and threaten, but inside, Veda reigned with quiet authority. She was no longer merely surviving, she was orchestrating the next phase, planning moves that would not just protect her, but dismantle the network that had tried to control her life. And deep inside, beneath the layers of strategy and vigilance, a quiet confidence had settled. She knew that the moment of confrontation was approaching. Not with anger, not with recklessness, but with the precision of someone who had studied the game, understood its players, and was ready to redefine the rules. The first real test came on a rainy evening. The sky was a wash of grey, and the wind carried with it the sharp scent of wet earth and distant thunder. Veda was in the study, reviewing the latest intelligence reports, when a notification flashed across her phone, a digital signature she immediately recognized. Someone was inside the perimeter. Her heart didn't race, her mind did. Every step she had taken, every precaution she had installed, now had a purpose. She moved quietly, checking cameras and sensors in real time. The figure was skilled, deliberate, but not invisible. Patterns emerged, a pause at a blind spot, a glance toward the camera, an adjustment to avoid motion sensors. Veda's eyes narrowed, she was watching someone trained, but they underestimated her. She triggered a subtle alert in the system, activating lights and sounds in specific zones to disorient the intruder. The figure hesitated, retracing steps. A small grin formed on Veda's lips. This was no longer a game of hiding. It was a test of intelligence, strategy, and patience. She didn't confront the intruder directly. Instead, she observed, learning every nuance of their approach. Every movement, every hesitation, every error was data. Within moments, she had mapped likely escape routes, potential reinforcements, and even predicted the person's next move. This wasn't just defense, it was anticipation. Then came the message. A simple, anonymous text, "You're ready." Veda's mind raced. This was not a threat, it was a recognition. Her adversaries, whoever they were, had realized that she had transformed. The warnings, the intrusions, the subtle tests, they had been preparations for this acknowledgement. And she understood immediately, the next phase was not just about protection, it was about engagement. Over the next few days, subtle patterns emerged in her adversaries' communications. She noticed indirect references, coded messages, and sudden movements in areas she had monitored for months. It was clear they were testing the waters, assessing her reach and capability. But Veda was always one step ahead. Every move they made revealed not only their intent but also their weaknesses. Veda's strategy evolved. She began feeding selective information into the network, creating controlled scenarios that forced her adversaries to act predictably. Every misstep they made, every reveal of data, was logged and analyzed. She was no longer reacting, she was directing, shaping the environment to her advantage. And yet, she remained calm. Confidence was not arrogance, it was preparation, skill, and awareness. She had spent months transforming fear into knowledge, vulnerability into insight. Every room in her home, every sensor, every camera was a tool. Every ally, every contact, every bit of intelligence she had gathered became part of a larger, intricate plan. It was during one quiet morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds, that Veda realized just how far she had come. She sat at her desk, reviewing digital maps, financial trails, and communications logs. Each thread told a story of control, influence, and greed. She had been on the receiving end once, but now she held the power to unravel it all. Her adversaries were clever, but predictable in their patterns. They underestimated one thing: the patience of someone who had survived fear, manipulation, and betrayal. Veda had learned to wait, to study, to calculate. Every action she would take from now on would be deliberate, precise, and devastating in its impact. Then the call came. Not a direct confrontation, not an order, but an offer. A meeting. A neutral location. The network was inviting her into the open, testing her willingness to step out of the shadows. Veda felt a chill, but it was not fear, it was anticipation. The stage had been set, the pieces in place. The encounter would be pivotal, and she was ready. She didn't rush. She didn't show eagerness. Instead, she prepared meticulously: routes, contingencies, allies, and fail-safes. Every angle was considered, every variable accounted for. By the time the day of the meeting arrived, Veda was not just ready, she was in control. And as she approached the meeting location, blending seamlessly into the crowd, she realized something profound: she no longer played by their rules. The game had changed. She was no longer a target. She was the strategist, the force shaping the outcome. And the first move of this new phase was hers. The meeting was set in a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city, a place that seemed ordinary to anyone passing by. Veda arrived early, dressed in unassuming attire, her movements fluid and confident. She scanned the area, noting exits, blind spots, and potential eavesdroppers. Nothing was left to chance. Moments later, a figure approached. Tall, calm, and composed, he carried the aura of authority without arrogance. He didn't rush, didn't scan the area nervously. He knew this game as well as she did. As he sat across from her, there was a brief moment of acknowledgement, a recognition of mutual respect forged through conflict. "Veda," he said, voice measured, "you've exceeded our expectations." She didn't smile. "I didn't come here for praise. I came because it's time to end the waiting." He nodded. "Direct, as always." "Very well. We've observed your methods, your patience, your discipline. You're capable. But this is not about capability, it's about choice. Power is offered, not given. Are you prepared to take it?" Veda studied him carefully. Every word, every gesture, every pause carried meaning. Power without purpose is chaos. I'm not interested in power for its own sake. I'm interested in resolution, in control over what matters. He leaned back, considering her answer. Resolution comes at a price. Control requires sacrifice. You understand that, don't you? She did. More than anyone else could. Her past had been carved by compromise, betrayal, and the harsh lessons of survival. She had learned that sacrifice was inevitable, but it needed to be calculated, intentional, and meaningful. "I understand," she said simply. "And I decide the terms." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the ambient hum of the cafe. Outside, the city moved obliviously, unaware of the quiet negotiation unfolding within. Then he spoke again, slower this time, as if choosing his words with care. "Very well. There is a challenge. A test of sorts. One final phase to determine if you are not just capable, but worthy. You will face opposition unlike anything before. This is not a test of strength alone, it is strategy, foresight, and resolve. Succeed, and the network acknowledges your position. Fail, and, well, failure is not an option you'll forget." Veda's eyes narrowed slightly. "I've never forgotten, nor have I feared. Give me the parameters." He slid a discreet envelope across the table. She picked it up, weighing it in her hand. Inside were documents, photographs, maps, and coded messages. The network had laid everything bare, every vulnerability, every target, every obstacle. And for the first time, she saw the scope of the challenge in front of her. It was massive, but not insurmountable. "You have 72 hours, he said. "Not a moment longer. Success depends on how well you understand not just the opposition, but yourself. Do you accept?" Veda studied the envelope, then the man across from her. Her mind raced, calculating every step, every contingency. "I accept," she said, with quiet certainty. And in that moment, the game truly began. Back at her safe house, Veda spread out the contents of the envelope across the table. Every piece of intelligence told a story, some of betrayal, some of greed, some of hidden alliances. She traced routes on maps, memorized faces in photographs, and began coding patterns into her systems. Every detail mattered, every misstep could cost more than she had ever imagined. Hours passed like minutes. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the windows, echoing the rhythm of her mind. Every possible scenario was simulated, tested, and discarded if flawed. Veda was relentless, analyzing, predicting, and preparing. By the time the first night ended, she had a plan, a multi-layered, intricate strategy that accounted for every possible contingency. It wasn't brute force, it was intelligence, patience, and precision. Every move had a purpose, every action a consequence. When dawn broke, Veda was ready. Not with weapons or anger, but with clarity, focus, and resolve. The network had offered her a test, but she had transformed it into an opportunity to seize control. And now, the real confrontation was imminent. The countdown had begun, and every second was a step closer to redefining the rules. The city was awakening, oblivious to the storm that was about to descend within its shadows. Veda moved with deliberate precision, each step mapped out hours in advance. Her plan was not about confrontation, it was about control, anticipation, and exploitation of weaknesses. Her first target was a communications hub, a facility that coordinated the flow of information for the opposition. Every signal, every message, every encrypted transmission passed through here. By gaining access, she could predict moves before they were even made. She approached under the guise of an ordinary courier. Her demeanor, casual yet controlled, drew no attention. Guards were present, eyes scanning mechanically, routines memorized. But Veda had already analyzed patterns, she knew the exact moment to move. Timing was everything. A subtle misdirection, a brief diversion, and she was inside. The interior smelled of electronics and antiseptic, a sterile environment buzzing with quiet activity. She slipped into a service corridor, avoided cameras, and reached the control room. Inside, a single operator monitored screens, unaware of the shadow that had entered. Veda moved swiftly, planting devices and intercepting signals. Every keystroke, every line of code, every transmission was captured and redirected. Within minutes, she had the intelligence she needed, schedules, hidden alliances, and vulnerabilities the opposition never suspected existed. From the rooftop across the street, she watched the facility. The city moved below like a living organism, oblivious to the manipulation that now coursed through its veins. She knew her every move would ripple outward, creating reactions she could exploit. The second phase involved extraction. A key informant, someone with access to the inner circle, had been identified in the envelope. Veda had to approach carefully. Any misstep could alert the opposition, and once alarmed, they would disappear into the labyrinth of the city. She located him in a crowded market. People jostled, voices overlapped, the chaos masking her movements. She approached calmly, blending into the crowd, and whispered a simple instruction. His eyes widened, recognition and fear mixing in equal measure. He followed, trusting her precision, trusting her reputation. Back at her safe house, the informant revealed secrets that confirmed her suspicions, a planned maneuver against her, a series of betrayals, and alliances she hadn't yet uncovered. Every piece of the puzzle fit together, painting a portrait of the opposition that was far more complex and far more dangerous than she had imagined. Veda knew the next move had to be decisive. She couldn't merely react, she had to dictate the terms. The game was no longer about observation, it was about intervention. An intervention required calculated pressure, executed without hesitation. Hours blurred as she prepared, layering contingencies upon contingencies. The clock was her silent partner, each tick a reminder that time was finite. By nightfall, she had mapped her strategy across the city like a chessboard, every piece positioned for maximum effect. Then, she made her first strike. A subtle disruption of communications, a temporary blackout, nothing that would alert the opposition entirely but enough to give her a tactical advantage. Screens flickered, alarms blinked, and for a moment, chaos took hold. From her vantage point, she watched as reactions unfolded exactly as she predicted. Minor disruptions, confusion, and hesitation rippled through the network. It was perfect. The first domino had fallen. Veda's phone buzzed. A single message appeared: "We see you. You've begun." She smiled faintly. The acknowledgement was both a warning and a confirmation. They knew she had started, but they didn't know the full extent of her reach yet. Night deepened, the city lights flickering against rain-slicked streets. The battle had begun not with bullets or explosions, but with intelligence, patience, and strategy. Veda was no longer just a player, she was the orchestrator, moving unseen pieces toward an inevitable checkmate. By the time dawn approached, the first phase was complete. The opposition was unsettled, their confidence shaken. Veda knew she had to keep momentum, pushing forward without hesitation. Any pause, any doubt, could allow them to regroup. And she would never allow that. Dawn broke over the city, but Veda didn't pause. Her safe house felt colder than usual, the early light casting long, sharp shadows across the room. Every detail mattered, the placement of objects, the path of escape routes, the smallest weakness in the defenses she had already infiltrated. The first direct confrontation was imminent. The opposition, rattled by the blackout and the leak of sensitive information, would move quickly to protect their interests. They didn't know she had already anticipated their reactions, and that ignorance was their vulnerability. Veda's plan was simple in theory but lethal in execution: isolate, confront, and extract. She had identified a key figure, a lieutenant whose influence kept the opposition cohesive. Removing him would fracture their unity and force mistakes she could exploit. She slipped into the city before sunrise, blending with early commuters and street vendors. Her movements were deliberate, almost invisible. The lieutenant's location had been confirmed: a fortified residence in an affluent district, guarded but not impenetrable. Veda approached cautiously. Cameras, motion sensors, and guards were all accounted for. One false step could trigger alarms, but she moved with precision. A small explosive at a rear gate created a distraction, drawing attention while she bypassed the primary defenses. Inside, the lieutenant was meeting with aides, unaware of the presence shadowing him. Veda observed silently, listening to every word. Their discussion revealed fractures within the opposition: rivalries, mistrust, and fear of an unknown force disrupting their plans. She waited for the moment when the lieutenant was isolated, separated from his aides. Then she made her move. A subtle maneuver, a quick takedown, and he was subdued without alerting the rest. Efficiency was key, unnecessary violence would only complicate matters. With the lieutenant secured, Veda accessed his communications. Every encrypted channel, every contact, every plan was now under her control. The opposition's network was slowly unraveling, each thread revealing deeper secrets, more vulnerabilities. But Veda wasn't reckless. She knew the opposition would retaliate if they discovered their lieutenant missing. Her next step required careful navigation through a city now alive with uncertainty. Back in her mobile command center, she coordinated moves with precision. Small, strategic leaks destabilized the opposition further. Rival factions began to clash, suspicion spreading like wildfire. Veda's interventions were invisible but undeniable. The city itself seemed to bend to her orchestration. As the day wore on, reports came in, minor skirmishes, miscommunications, failed operations. The opposition was on edge, and that edge was exactly where Veda wanted them. Then, a new complication emerged. A rival within the opposition, someone Veda hadn't accounted for, had begun to trace the disruptions back to her. This was unexpected but not insurmountable. Every challenge presented an opportunity to tighten her grip. Veda prepared for the encounter. She knew it wouldn't be a traditional confrontation. This rival wasn't just cautious, they were clever, ruthless, and resourceful. She would have to outthink them, anticipate every move before it was made. The city darkened again, the setting sun casting an orange haze across the skyline. From her vantage point, she observed the rival's movements, careful, calculated, yet leaving just enough trace for Veda to follow. The chase had begun, a game of intellect, strategy, and nerves. Night fell completely, and the streets transformed into a network of shadows and whispers. Veda moved like a phantom, unseen yet omnipresent. Every decision she made, every step she took, was part of a larger design, a trap carefully laid for her adversary. The rival entered an abandoned warehouse, likely thinking it a secure location. But Veda had prepared. Lights flickered, alarms triggered false signals, and the rival's path became predictable. Every escape route had been accounted for, every option limited. When the confrontation occurred, it was not with brute force but with psychological precision. Veda revealed just enough to unsettle, just enough to force mistakes. The rival faltered, realizing too late that they had walked into a situation controlled entirely by Veda. By the end of the night, the rival was neutralized, not eliminated, but rendered powerless. Their resources, contacts, and information now belonged to Veda. The opposition's cohesion was crumbling, their ability to strategize compromised. Veda stepped back, observing the city that had become her chessboard. Every piece moved exactly as intended. But she knew this was only the beginning. The real game was still ahead, and the stakes were higher than ever. The city was restless. Rumors swirled in whispers, the opposition scrambling to fill the void left by their fractured leadership. But Veda was ahead of every move, anticipating desperation and chaos before it could even manifest. She didn't just react, she orchestrated. Her attention turned to the deeper players, those who had remained in the shadows, waiting for an opening. They were cautious, aware that sudden changes could be traps. But even the most careful strategist could not resist the lure of power when a key lieutenant vanished, leaving opportunities exposed. Veda's approach was methodical. She struck indirectly at first, using information as her weapon. Leaks, subtle manipulations, and carefully timed miscommunications created fissures within the opposition. Trust eroded rapidly, alliances crumbled, and internal conflicts escalated. Amid the turmoil, a new adversary emerged, someone who had remained invisible until now. Their intelligence was formidable, their instincts sharp, and they seemed to predict Veda's moves. For the first time, she encountered uncertainty, a variable that threatened to destabilize her strategy. Veda analyzed patterns, tracking every action, every hint of deviation. The new player wasn't reckless, they calculated risk, weighed outcomes, and avoided direct confrontation. But Veda understood that control was not about force alone, it was about leverage, precision, and timing. Using her network of informants, she created illusions of weakness. Fake vulnerabilities were displayed, confidential data seemingly leaked, and staged mistakes were made. Slowly, she baited her adversary, drawing them into a scenario they believed they controlled. Meanwhile, the city's atmosphere grew tense. Security forces, influenced by the opposition, began investigating anomalies, further distracted by the chaos Veda had engineered. Ordinary citizens noticed nothing, but the ripple effects were everywhere. Movement, communication, and coordination became increasingly difficult for her enemies. The showdown came on a stormy night. Rain hammered rooftops and streets, masking footsteps and muffling sound. Veda's adversary moved carefully through abandoned industrial zones, believing they were unseen. But Veda had already predicted their path, anticipating every calculated risk. The confrontation was subtle but devastating. No loud explosions or dramatic gunfire, just a collision of intellects and strategy. Veda presented choices that seemed free but were all guided, manipulations cloaked as options. Her adversary, skilled as they were, found themselves constrained, forced to react to moves already anticipated. In the end, Veda didn't just win the encounter, she reshaped it. The new adversary, once a threat, was neutralized without revealing her full power. Their network and resources folded into her control. Every loose end within the opposition now pointed back to her, every hidden player accounted for or incapacitated. But Veda understood this victory was fragile. The opposition had remnants, loyalists in pockets, undetected allies, and international connections that might strike unpredictably. Each victory deepened her exposure, each move required relentless vigilance. She retreated to her command center, rain dripping from her coat, reviewing her growing empire of influence. Maps, schedules, and communications glowed on screens before her, a complex web of control and observation. The city itself was a living board of strategy, each element tuned to her orchestration. Night deepened, and in the quiet, Veda allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The game she played was larger than any single objective. It was about dominance, survival, and ensuring that chaos was always on her terms. But even she knew that the next phase would demand more than intelligence. It would demand courage, decisiveness, and the willingness to make impossible choices. As the storm subsided, the city breathed under her unseen influence. Power had shifted quietly, imperceptibly, but irrevocably. Veda's control was near total, yet she remained vigilant, aware that the final chapter of this struggle was still ahead. Every player, every faction, every shadow within the city would soon have to reckon with her. And when that reckoning came, nothing would be the same. The city had changed. Streets that once echoed with uncertainty now whispered her name. Veda's influence was complete, yet the tension in the air was palpable. Every ally and enemy aware, in some measure, that the final reckoning was near. She had mastered control, manipulation, and strategy, but the ultimate challenge demanded more than intellect. It demanded confrontation, courage, and sacrifice. The storm that had been threatening the city all week finally broke, lightning cutting across the sky like jagged veins of fire. In the darkness, Veda moved through her command center with quiet precision. Screens displayed every district, every key figure, every potential threat. Yet her focus was on one target, the last adversary who had eluded her for months, someone whose cunning had almost matched her own. They had disappeared into the shadows, but she knew they had been watching, waiting for the perfect moment. She planned the final move with meticulous care. The strategy was no longer about manipulation, it was about inevitability. Every trap, every decoy, every hint of vulnerability had been positioned to converge into a single point. Tonight, the final confrontation would occur, and the outcome would be absolute. The location was symbolic, a crumbling tower at the edge of the city, overlooking the skyline like a sentinel of forgotten power. Her adversary arrived as predicted, moving cautiously, aware that this could be a trap. Veda waited, unseen, observing their every step. The tension was electric, almost tangible, and the storm's fury mirrored the intensity of what was about to unfold. When the encounter finally occurred, words were unnecessary. The exchange was subtle, a battle of minds and instincts rather than brute force. Every move, every reaction, had been anticipated. The adversary realized too late that they had been guided into a scenario where every option led to Veda's advantage. There was no escape, no surprise, no loophole. And then, in the silence between thunderclaps, Veda revealed herself. Her presence was calm, almost serene, but underneath lay the weight of unrelenting power. The adversary's eyes widened not in fear, but in recognition. They understood that the game was over. Every plan, every scheme, every carefully guarded secret had been rendered obsolete. Veda didn't strike with violence. She struck with clarity, decisiveness, and finality. She offered a choice, though in reality, it was only the illusion of choice. Surrender, and retain a measure of life and dignity, or resist, and face total annihilation. The adversary hesitated, caught between pride and survival, but the inevitable conclusion was already written. With a measured nod, the adversary accepted. Power, control, and influence that had once seemed unshakable now belonged to Veda. Every faction in the city, every hidden player, every remaining trace of resistance bowed, consciously or unconsciously, to her dominance. The storm began to subside. Rain softened into a gentle drizzle, washing the streets, the rooftops, the towers that had borne witness to this silent war. Veda emerged from the shadows onto the roof of the tower, gazing over the city she now controlled. It was quiet, almost peaceful, but beneath the surface, the pulse of the city beat in sync with her own. Victory, however, was bittersweet. Every decision had a cost. Allies had been sacrificed, enemies eliminated, and innocents had been caught in the crossfire. Yet she accepted the weight of her choices, understanding that power demanded both ruthlessness and restraint, precision and patience. The city was hers, but the price of dominion was eternal vigilance. As dawn broke, light spread across the skyline, illuminating a metropolis transformed. Veda stood tall, her presence unchallenged, her authority absolute. Every whisper, every shadow, every heartbeat of the city acknowledged her. She had not only survived but had rewritten the rules of the game. In the end, it was not force alone that had defined her triumph, but intellect, courage, and an unflinching understanding of human nature. The final chapter was closed, yet the story of the city and of Veda's enduring influence would continue, echoing through alleys, towers, and hearts, a testament to what one mind, unyielding and decisive, could accomplish. And in that quiet moment, looking out over the city, Veda allowed herself a rare acknowledgement of what she had achieved. The game was won. The city, and all within it, would never forget.